June 11th.
Okay,
Today's June 11th, and I'd like to call this meeting to order.
I have the agenda here, if you want me to kind of just pull it up real quick. So I will do roll call really quickly. Tom Blue Rock Chair, informed me he will not be here today, so Lindy, as the Vice Chair, you're gonna be running the meeting, so
Okay.
Lindy Gibson, I assume you're here,
Yes.
okay? Eli Esley,
Here.
Kristen Vanderlyn,
Here.
and Jack Luther.
Here.
Excellent, 4 out of 5, that works. Do you wanna go to item 2?
Okay, and the reason we're all here is because we're not all there. Item 2 is approval of minutes. Do I have a motion that we approve last month's meetings of May 14th, last month's meetings? Minutes of May 14th.
I move we approve last month's minutes.
Satan does fast.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Unanimous. We do not have anybody online right now. And so, and there's nobody in the audience. That's our policy analyst. I know he doesn't have public comments, so. I don't think we're gonna have any public comments.
Okay. So we'll go on to the next item on the agenda, and that's new business. And we have one request to approve the signage on the doors at the office lounge on Main and Lewis
Correct.
to match their logo on their roof.
Correct. And I tried to highlight it. There weren't any great pictures, but there's 2 double doors. So both the outside doors have the new logo and the side door, there it is, sorry. That matches their logo online. And then those are already installed, and then they have one on the side on Lewis Street. There's that little side door. So they all look the same. It matches their logo online. They didn't do anything else to the front windows. Do y'all have any questions? It's not here, but
Questions or comments? Okay,
And I move that we approve the office signage.
I second the motion.
okay. All in favor?
Aye.
That was easy.
Yeah.
Okay, now I am going to turn this over to,
Jennifer, is that you taking a picture of the door?
No.
Oh, okay, I wondered.
it was,
When I saw it at home, I wondered.
yeah.
Is she calling all the CC or just me?
All of them.
And actually, I realized I wasn't.
Because I consider myself reasonable. Not easy, but reasonable.
And it's like an overview.
Oh, some public.
So, okay. We're here and then yours are down here. Okay, as you want, and then you know how to share screens, right? Yes.
Seems like.
Not well.
Not well.
So do you want to fill the screen?
Sure. Okay.
Me share the screen.
We're getting historic preservation 101 from the state, from Chippewa.
Yes.
Good idea. Just kidding.
Oh, yeah.
How many years have you been on this
Little
board?
knowledge is a dangerous thing, you know.
Been on this board 20 years? 17 years. 17 years.
There's a tiny thing of us.
Yeah, you've been on the board 17 years.
Okay.
Not quite.
Wonderful.
Right.
60.
So this is
I
This
used to be on
is to the staff that are immensely helpful from State Historic Preservation Office, and I will let them do their boot camp.
So I just go and then you're gonna be all National Register all the time, and I'll just give a quick overview.
And we always overtalk each other, so.
We do. We've tag team for a really long time. We've been doing this for a while. So my name is Kate Hampton, and I was first National Register Coordinator at the State Historic Preservation Office from 2000 to 2010. 8. And then, thank you. And Then I worked for Preserve Montana, which you met this afternoon. And came back to SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Office, we call it SHPO. And I'm the Certified Local Government Coordinator, so there are 16 communities statewide that are what we call certified local governments. Livingston is one of them. And basically that means they've been approved by the Park Service as local governments that have vibrant historic preservation programs, meaning you have a historic preservation officer and you have a historic preservation commission as directed by your ordinance. And so certified local governments are, again, we have them statewide, and they are designated as such for several reasons, but one of the biggest reasons is because we have to pass money through our office from the Park Service to you. So each year, each CLG, each local government that has this program and designation receives an annual grant from our office. Generally, minimally, it's at least $6,000 a year to support your preservation program and preservation activities. And sometimes we have special project funding. And so that's what our Livingston survey going on right now is a little extra CLG pass-through money. That money comes from the Historic Preservation Fund. So that's the National Park Service federal money passes through our office. We're required to give at least 10% of our Historic Preservation Fund grant to certified local governments across the state. So that's a big, so we usually are in a lovely building, and we are not in a lovely building right now. As you might have heard, the Historical Society has a big addition going on it. So the Montana Historical Society in Helena, the actual building is shut down right now. There's no access to archives, our research center, the museum, everything's packed away as we build a giant, remarkable addition to our Historical Society building. And so when that reopens in 2025, that's where you'll find us. But for now, we're in cubicle hell in the basement of 910 Helena Avenue in Helena. So if you want to come with us, go ahead.
So every time one of you phone, everybody in our cube knows what's going on.
Exactly.
They must
There's
have
no
no
secrets in this building. So very quickly, state historic preservation offices, there is a state historic preservation office in every state in the nation. Plus our territory. So there's a Guam Historic Preservation Office, there's a Hawaii, there's Puerto Rico, US Virgin Islands, which I always thought would be a really nice SHPO to work for if I went down to the Virgin Islands. And there are also tribal historic preservation offices. So every tribal government in Montana, for example, has what we call a THPO, a Tribal Historic Preservation Office.
Are
And
there
a
9 of them?
9, yeah, even Little Shell has it, right?
They just established.
They
one,
just
yeah.
established one.
Because don't we have 9,
There's a
tribes?
trivia question I
Oh,
should know the
I'm
answer to, but
Federally
That's
recognized.
interesting. I didn't know.
federally
Federally
recognized.
recognized, because I'm sure there's a lot more. that are
Wow.
not.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
So, very quickly, what established the National Register Program and the Certified Local Government Program was the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966. The impetus behind it was there were a lot of big federal projects going on in the 50s and early 60s. Mostly the interstate system, right? Federal government is building huge interstates that cuts through swaths of properties. And we're losing a lot of historic places that are meaningful to the community by virtue of these federal programs and federal projects. So they needed a way to be able to ascertain what is significant, what is worthy of preservation, right? And that's where the National Register came from. It's the nation's official list of properties that are worthy of preservation. And John will get more into it a little bit more, but the foundation for everything we do, the setup of certified local governments, what we call Section 106, which is the review of federal projects, and CLGs, just about everything historic preservation adjacent is by virtue of the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966. So what does a SHPO do? We travel on yellow buses, which is pretty fun. This is up there too fast. If you haven't done that trip, do it. It's so much fun. So we have a role in federal government. Again, We work with federal agencies. When a federal agency like the Forest Service has a project, it's what we call an undertaking, and they say, we're gonna do this, and it might affect this historic bridge. And they have to consult with us on that. So I won't get into the dirty details of section 106 compliance, but know that it happens. And it also happens at the state level. We have the Montana Antiquities Act, under which state property, so projects on state property have to be consulted. The agency that owns the property has to consult with our office on projects. And that way we just ensure that cultural resources are considered when public money is being utilized or public permitting is utilized. And they just have to consult with us. So there are different levels of consultation, but that consultation has to take place. Doesn't necessarily mean the project won't happen. We can't, but the process has to be followed, kind of like you guys in your design review, right?
Yeah.
So this is our old website. Actually, it's just getting updated,
Yeah.
which is kind of exciting. So other historic preservation laws to think of, the Antiquities Act of 1906, which Teddy Roosevelt championed, largely because there were pot hunters in the Southwest that were literally throwing Native American artifacts onto train cars and shipping them to Europe. And they needed a way to say, hey, let's be considerate of our cultural resources. And so that's where the Antiquities Act of 1906 comes in. Historic Sites Act of 1935 establishes the National Trust for Historic Preservation. National Trust for Historic Preservation is now a separate entity. It's not a government entity anymore. Oh, and then 1949, excuse me, Historic Sites Act of 35 for 25, remember. It all happened. I should say that. So preservation adjacent laws are NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act. So when a pipeline is happening, for example, and they have to do what we call an EIS, an environmental impact statement, often they'll wrap their section 106, their cultural resource consultation in with those larger documents. So we often work parallel with the NEPA process. And then the NAGPRA, the Repatriation Act. And so when human remains are found and being respectful of repatriating those human remains. There are lots more, but that's getting into the weeds and we don't need to know all of the laws. Just know that laws exist. And if you have a question, call us and we'll tell you which laws are applicable. So parallel to that, exactly like I said, there's the Antiquities Act, and then there's the Montana Human Skeletal Remains and Burial Site Protection Act. That establishes the burial board. Our office, our state archaeologist, Jessica Bush, is staffed to that burial board. So whenever there are human remains found, they must be presented to the board. The board then decides, there's a member from every tribal nation, and they decide where those remains will go and how they will be interred.
Isn't that interesting that my opening joke had to do with the
I was
skeleton
just
that
thinking
they
that.
found at the Depot Center? I meant to do that. That is.
Exactly. She would probably go to the
No,
state
see, you
lab.
can
in
use that. I
Missoula.
don't copyright my material. It could be any
Oh, I'll
people you
integrate that
want.
into my-
That's wild. That's weird. I love it.
And then we do all of these things. There's 9 of us in our office, and we all kind of have our own little niches of information that we deal with. John, as I said, is National Register Coordinator. I'm the Community Preservation Coordinator, so I work with local governments, lots of grants, lots of special projects.
And we probably have the most overlap out
Right.
of people in the office.
Right.
Which is how you can
Complete
finish
each
each other's
sentences.
sentences.
We've been doing this a long time. Okay, so I'm gonna skip over the National Register because John will do the National. So don't look.
Oh, so yours goes into more detail, mine is lots of flashy.
So, are you gonna talk about signs?
I didn't plan it, but we can't. You're the reason
Most people want to be
Want to be
listed in the National Register because they can get a National Register sign, right? So the state of Montana is one of the few states in the country that actually subsidize National Register signage. It's not an automatic thing when you are listed in the National Register that you get a sign. It's a Montana thing. They're paid for by the bed tax. subsidy, a small percentage of the bud tax comes to the Historical Society, and we work with property owners. Write the text for these National Register signs,
It's automatic that you can get one, but the property owner has to order.
the property owner has to
The
work.
We
state
had to
doesn't
pay
send
for
them
it
out
too.
until they get a
One for
request.
Sacagawea.
Right,
Yeah.
but you only have to pay
Oh,
like
small, yeah.
$65 when the sign itself costs about $550,
That makes
$700 for the whole sign. So it's subsidized on that. So we want, property owners to be invested in the program. It's also an allowable expense under the Certified Local Government Program. So if you wanted to use some of the grant money from our offices to pay for National
for that.
Register signage, that's also an allowable expense. But that is done through our office as well, the Montana Historical Society anyway. We also do National Register and archaeological surveys, that archaeological surveys can't be National Register too. So again, we're working on one currently in Livingston. We were just at Big Timber last week, a couple days ago.
5 days. ago.
5 days ago, talking about the potential for a National Register district in Big Timber. It's never been surveyed. So we're starting from the absolute scratch there, identifying historic buildings, doing the historic research, that sort of thing. The town in this map here on the screen, is actually Laurel. It's the last new commercial historic district we did, and that was
That's
probably
2010.
2010. Yeah.
No, I understand.
14 years ago. So their big job is a big job to get a historic district listed. And so they're farther and farther between. We are currently working on a new survey manual. And we have a contractor who's gonna write up basically best practices for completing what we call AER forms, architecture, engineering record forms, for individual properties and how to go about a survey. That's for the built environment, not for archaeology.
Right.
Again, like I mentioned, we do review and compliance where we talk to state and federal agencies about projects and how that might affect cultural resources. And if it will have an adverse effect, how do we mitigate that project? The Certified Local Government Program, again, is my program. It's nationwide. There are about 1,200 certified local governments. Florida has like 120. We only have 15. So they also have a lot more people over there. But it's really kind of funny when I go to the certified local government meetings and everybody's like, oh my gosh, I had to drive all the way from, Poughkeepsie to wherever. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I had to drive to Miles City,
There's like 45 minutes somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. So certified local governments, in your case, you were just the city of Livingston is the certified local government. It could also be a county government. So we have like Hill County, Bighorn County, the counties themselves are the certified local government. So it can be both.
Yeah.
Park County is
Laurel,
not.
Yellowstone.
And Park County is not.
Okay.
But Park County actually is one of the more embracing of historic preservation best practices than other counties. In that any subdivision that comes under consideration or is permitted, they are asked to consult with us to see whether or not cultural resources would be affected by that subdivision, and we might recommend a survey.
Two really good planners there, so, yeah.
So,
And originally Livingston was in Gallatin County, and Gallatin County went all the way to Red Lodge. It was huge in the beginning.
huge,
I don't know
yeah.
how what they were thinking, that's such a distance, maybe.
Probably no one living there.
Pardon?
Probably not very many people living out there.
Yeah.
The original like Dawson.
Yeah,
County,
like
so-
when Bozeman's the head of Gallatin County, that's quite a distance.
Right,
That's amazing.
right,
Yeah.
right, just the vast distances that it covers. But that's the way we like it. Our office also administers the Federal Rehabilitation Tax Credit Program, and there's a state tax credit that piggybacks on top of that. So up to 20% of the cost of a rehabilitation or restoration can come back in the form of personal income tax credits. Or this is for National Register listed properties. It either needs to be listed in the National Register or listed by the time the project is finished.
They can run concurrently.
It can run
The
concurrently.
National Register will speak and tax.
So is that
tax
what the
credit.
Elks do? Because I know KPRK is already listed.
KPRK is, yes, they are currently going for federal and
Yeah.
state tax credits, and they're consulting with our office really.
And Fanning Goat as well, but they're not on the, or do they qualify
are.
because they're in the district?
Right, and John will explain that,
okay.
right, either you're contributing to a historic
Yep.
district or you're individually listed.
Got it.
Both designations mean you're listed in the National Register.
Oh,
Mm.
okay, automatically.
Right,
And what,
Right.
Kate, what are the criteria for that? Are we just looking at exterior renovation or interior renovation?
for the tax credit program, it's both interior and exterior, it can be either or both, kind of a phased program, project two. But those projects must meet the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation, what we call the SOI standards. Basically, there are 10 tenets of it, but the basic idea is if it's not broke, don't fix it. If you have to replace it in kind. And whenever possible, go back to the historic appearance, use the historic materials. You know, it's just common sense, best practices, historic preservation, where we understand that the best historic preservation projects are projects where people live and work in these buildings. We want them used. We don't want to be such sticklers that we make a project untenable or ridiculously expensive.
Okay.
We understand that there's give and take. That's why there are different standards. There's restoration, rehabilitation, reconstruction, and what's the fourth one? Renovation, maybe. So there are different levels and different standards for each level. Mostly it's rehabilitation, meaning we understand that this place is going to have a new use and some changes might have to occur. So it's a give and take across the board. But you know, you want to retain as much historic integrity of the building as you can. And John will talk about the aspects of it, right? Sure.
The Great Boat did that. We got tax credit.
Right.
Are we currently surveying things that already exist in the downtown historic district?
Yes, and the reason we are
Mhm.
is because when the historic district was created, individual forms on individual buildings were never done. So we don't have any information about individual buildings within the district, except for those that have been,
The post office is one.
So
the post office is individually
Individually
listed.
So are they, I guess I kind of thought that you said that if they exist in the historic district, then they're already on the registrar.
They are already
They
listed.
are
already
we just don't have-
there.
We have zero information. Often people will phone our office and say, hey, I own the building or the house in such and such a street. Most of the time, if it's been listed in a district, we can go to our file cabinet
Mhm.
and find a property record form, or the AER form. as they're
So
called
the
now.
survey isn't to put them on the
Correct.
registrar, it's already
People
there,
look at
just
this
getting
book and they say,
information.
hey, I want this such and such a building. We're like,
We
all you got is the district nomination. We don't have any individual.
We don't have any individual information. That's true all of Livingston. For
Doesn't the clerk and recorder's office have the original plats on file?
Oh, they would have things.
They have, right, but as far as a document, a comprehensive document that tells the history of a specific building within the
Oh,
district,
okay,
we don't have that.
okay.
And so that's what we're
Just
working
the
on kind of
structural
piecemeal.
information, Okay.
Right,
Who-
so
who's
they
all
would
been
use
bought?
things like the
So-
plat information, the Polk directories to
The-
compile the history of the building.
Business
How does
office.
someone submit information? I do know something. I was raised in the original A.W. Miles home on 222 South Sixth, then he built 226 and 230, but nothing's ever been registered. My mother was approached about it and she was too private and wouldn't go with it. Does a private citizen, is it just hearsay? There's a picture of me on the stagecoach stoop that goes from the street down to the sidewalk. And that's all we have as far as the record of anything historical. And then my dad jackhammered it out because we had a grocery store across the street and everyone was complaining about banging their cars. But who submits that? Do private individuals do that?
Private property.
Even though they're not a
owners,
current property owner? I'd
Absolutely.
love to get that recorded somewhere.
yeah, there's no, anybody can nominate a property to the National Register, anybody can
Okay.
compile
But if you
historic
nominate somebody
information.
else's property,
They
Yeah,
have to
yeah,
be
yeah,
approved,
okay.
yeah.
Yeah,
To
yeah,
actually
and I'm
list.
friends with the current owners, yeah.
Right, to actually
Correct.
list it, you have to get permission, but anybody can research any property they like, it's public information, right?
Okay.
I noticed Patricia wants to say something. Patricia, do we have time for some questions afterwards that we could do as public?
Sure, I'm almost
Yeah,
finished with
yeah.
this and then let's get,
Yeah.
let John, but hi, it's nice to see you, I'm Kate, it's nice to see you again. Oh wait, actually, this is the last. Oh, the only other thing I wanted to say about the tax credit is that the federal tax credit is 20% of the cost of the rehabilitation. And it's just the rehabilitation, the footprint of the building, right? It's for approved project on the footprint of the building. It's not landscaping, it's not anything, it's the building itself. And if you get the 20% tax credit, then you can also apply and have an additional 5% state tax credit
Okay.
for the program. So then up to 25% of the cost of the rehabilitation can come back to the property owner in the form of tax credits. If it's a nonprofit or somebody who doesn't have that kind of tax liability, we are not accountants. We cannot give you advice as to how to do your funding or your taxes. But there are ways to syndicate and essentially sell the tax credit to another investor. So for example, in Whitehall, remember, I think it was 2009, there was the terrible fire in Whitehall and devastated the downtown. And at that point, the Borden block was a hotel that had been abandoned, wonderful corner building. It was basically the last standing historic building on that block and within 3 blocks in Whitehall. And they didn't want to lose it.
Okay.
So the local extension office and Jefferson County Development Corporation, even though they are not for-profit entities, moved forward with the rehabilitation, and the bank that lent them the money became an investor in the project and were able to take the tax credit. And so that was an incentive for the bank to come in and help this project because they were getting the benefit at the other side. So there are ways to layer these incentive programs on top of each other in order to make a viable project, because we understand that sometimes historic materials are more expensive. They take a little bit more effort, a little bit more consideration, and sometimes a little bit more money, especially if you're looking at custom windows or something like that. And the intent of the federal tax credit program is to offset that cost, to give people incentive to go that extra mile and retain as much historic material as possible.
Was the Borden building originally the hotel across the street from the railroad boulevard?
That's exactly
I
it.
wondered.
That's it, yeah.
That's
Yeah,
exactly it.
okay.
Yeah, so go see it. It looks lovely now. And it's actually, there are a couple of rooms that are Airbnb rooms, so you can even stay in.
Oh, that's
So I
nice.
highly recommend it. Yes, it's delightful.
Real quick.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Go
Yeah.
ahead.
So if you have a building and it's in the registrar and it has a sign and everything, and you want to remodel it,
Mhm.
can you do whatever you want to it?
If it's commercial again, you have to, it has to be a commercial.
And
Oh,
what-
no,
what-
that's for the tax credit.
For the tax credit, right?
But yes, private property
Oh, you
owners
see,
manage
right,
their
right,
properties as they see fit.
Okay.
So I always say you can paint it purple and put a turret on it, and I can't tell you, you can't do that. The
unless someone
designation
applied for the
doesn't do
tax,
anything.
unless
The
someone-
Designation
local
itself.
district
Unless you
designation.
take-
Where it
take
does
federal money.
change, where it
Oh,
does
for heaven's
change
sakes.
is if there's a local ordinance
Like
that
our
has
downtown.
design review. Or if you are taking a federal benefit
Mhm.
or need a federal permit to do that. You're gonna have to go through that consultation process with us. Regardless if it's listed or eligible for listing. So it really doesn't make any difference whether it's listed or not from the federal review process, because that applies to both listed properties and properties that are eligible for listing. Follow? I know it's confusing.
No.
So basically, there
That's a good
is no restriction associated with National Register listing on private property rights.
Yeah.
It's one of those myths that can work against us and can work for us at the preservation office, you know, that a lot of people assume that it's on the National Register, then they can't change it, but that's actually not true, except when there's a local review process.
That's a good
The
question.
local historic preservation
Yeah.
districts, and it's the same everywhere I've worked, are way more stringent. I mean,
Right.
they can control
Right.
what color you paint your house. as my friend used to say, whether or not you replace a birdie bath in your front yard or not, if it was historic, so it's.
Yeah, there are many, many
places that get
levels.
really,
Right.
really,
Many, many levels of the review, you know, and I think probably the most restrictive review, or the most intense review process in the state of Montana is actually Bozeman. They have a conservation overlay. They've had it since the early 1990s. And basically they need what they call a certificate of appropriateness, which I always think sounds so snooty. And, you know, maybe we could say, let's all just agree that we don't need to,
and there's plenty of them that get denied.
and sometimes.
I don't know about Bozeman, but
Yeah.
like a lot of places, yeah.
Not in Bozeman so much. Actually, we have a really good track record of early consultation. Where they come in as soon as they're applying or thinking of applying for a building permit, they said, before you do this, you go talk to the preservation
Yeah.
officer and see if we
She's pretty
can't
great.
just, talk about it and mitigate or come to a compromise before we even start filling out the paperwork, so then it'll sail through. So we have some really good, surprisingly, Butte, National Historic Landmark. How many thousand properties in Butte are listed in the National Register of Historic Places? They have a demolition review ordinance, and they have, when there's local money being used, then that triggers a design review. Otherwise, there is no design review. So,
Interesting.
so different places have different levels, and it's basically the community themselves deciding how much regulation they want to put within their
It
communities.
kind of washes the whole idea of preservation. It's almost a contradiction. Interesting.
We were just driving through the residential
Interesting.
neighborhood here, and but there isn't any design review on residential buildings in Livingston, is there?
If it's, in the downtown historic district, and I don't think there are any strictly, they maybe have a residential use now. But, because I could think of the new condos that are on the north side of the, industrial tile building. But I think all the houses are outside the historic district.
The Main Street
Mhm.
Historic District, we do have several residential historic districts here in town.
And
there's
those
no
are not,
review.
there's no design review, only in the downtown historic district.
So that's, you know, it's just different places have different, different rules.
And
that
like,
their
did you see
communities
something
develop.
that you didn't like? Today?
Actually, we were looking at a couple and we were like, oh, that was pretty good. You know, in fact, there's a new construction house on Calendar in one of the corners, and we're looking at it and we're like, well, it's obviously new,
Yeah,
which it
that's
should
the
be.
single platted.
The shingle clad house.
We did that.
Oh, did you?
Yes,
Yeah.
It fits really nicely
Yeah.
into the neighborhood.
we considered that pretty strongly to make sure that it fit the character.
It sure
Yeah.
did. You did a
That's the
fantastic
guy
job.
from Napa, right?
The
Yeah.
fit and calendar, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was one that,
Yeah.
it's new
We kinda,
infill, completely sympathetic to the historic district.
Well,
And
thank
so we were like,
Yeah.
hey, there's one, that's
We
a
put
good
effort
one.
into that.
The one right next to it might be a little bit.
We didn't do that.
But yeah, so you can see, you know, the difference between thoughtfulness and less consideration for the historic setting in communities across the state. And so really quick, I'm gonna let John jump in and do his National Register spiel, and then we will take even more questions.
That's what your new building's gonna look like.
Yes, I'm sorry, that was for
Pretty.
you, that was, and you know, well, it was under construction, it was all kind of black.
Oh,
And it looked like something out of Star Wars. It was really.
Yeah,
Death Star?
Death Star, like a transporter. and stuff.
yeah.
Anyway, do you wanna take this?
And feel free to just ask questions.
Are we sharing this? Let me make sure that.
Yeah,
Sorry, I just wanna make sure, yes.
No, you got pictures.
Yes, what was it?
have a copy of, what do we call that, Jack, when Llewellyn came in and put everything on the National Historic Register, there's over 400.
You've got a copy right there in the corner.
The multiple properties documentation.
But have you had that, or it's?
We have
I think
them.
we have pieces of it, but not the whole thing. Junk out of the whole thing.
Oh,
Yeah, we just made a copy of everything.
I'm gonna
Right.
close yours.
Because that gives a lot of
we have
precedence, you know, the issue.
Yeah, no, this is great.
This is yours.
Billy Miles Grain and Brother Grain.
That one,
Yeah.
Billy
So the
Miles
one
used to shoot
grain
horses,
elevator
you know
is
where the,
one.
sure where the apartments are, that 5-star. That's where Billy Miles had his business originally. So he was more than just a local guy. Sorry, I'm just.
If we're able to share, I'm not sure.
I know how that goes. Every time we have a board meeting. I never
That
get
way
working right.
for, okay, I think that's it, yeah,
Okay.
so that way people at home, or when play this back for the recording, because I think we're gonna use this in the future. Okay, yes, there we go. Now that we get the transcript, you go.
Oh, this is fine.
it's showing full screen.
Thank you.
Yeah. But Billy.
Okay, so some of you are probably familiar with this process. You know Jack is.
Yeah, that could be true.
Jack has his name on a nomination.
Yeah.
Jack and John put together the Sacagawea, Miles Park, historic.
Well, let's
District
be
application.
clear, John did that, I fed him some information.
No,
lot.
not at all, not at all. So some of this, obviously Kate went over, established from the National Historic Preservation Act of 66. So similar to the National Register, but different are the NHL, National Historic Landmarks. And that's what Butte is. Butte also has a National Register District, you're talking about that, which is actually the largest National Register District west of the Mississippi. So Butte Anaconda.
Yeah,
Right. So out of the almost 2,500 NHL, Montana does have 20, which is pretty good representation for not a huge population. So, but the setups are generally different. Often the National Register forms, we all write. NHL generally are contracted out, and often the Park Service is heavily involved in writing them. It's the whole next level of documentation. Instead of just comparing the Kakawea Park to other parks in town or Montana, at an NHL level, you're comparing it to all the parks across the nation at the highest of the highest level.
Right.
So,
National Historic Landmarks are those properties that are important to the nation as a whole. So they tell a national story, and that's why the
we
Park
do not
Service.
currently have, I mean, so Livingston does not have one because
Right.
they're so hard to come by, right?
Because they are so rare. They are 29 in the state of Montana, but we do believe that your depot is National Historic Landmark
Yep.
eligible, but it is not
With-
listed such.
Yep, no, we
Yeah.
talked about that.
yeah, first people Bison jump. When you're hitting the Great Falls, off the 15, that's an NHL. That's probably the most recent.
Yeah.
NHL, probably 7-8 years ago. And it's a prehistoric site, pre-contact site, so.
Yep.
Pompey's Pillar is another one
Pompey's
that
Pillar.
you might be
okay.
familiar with.
Correct,
Chief Plenty Coups residence.
yeah.
Yeah.
So Montana is well represented in that category.
But we want it to be 30.
Okay, so locally, and I threw in Park County here too, of course. The Billy Miles and Brothers Grain Elevator, that's one of the more recent ones. Livingston Memorial Hospital, which actually received tax credits, I believe. right?
Is on the National Register, the, wow.
John, that photo said Billy Miles and Brothers Grain Elevator, Yellowstone County.
Oh, I just screwed up then, sorry. That I did in Yellowstone.
Well, you know, was it really Livingston? Because where the Sherwood Inn, that five-story
This is on
senior
previous,
housing was Billy Miles, and he used to shoe horses. He was a farrier there. And I'm sure, I hate to say that, you're sure there was a grain elevator at the end of Maine?
No, you're looking at the Tesla,
It's the Tesla.
Yeah.
Tesla grain elevator.
It's a, it was
Oh,
originally
okay,
a Billy
yeah,
Miles
okay.
elevator.
So it's
Tesla.
Tesla bought it. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, that's where I got lost.
Yep.
Because usually grain elevators are along a railroad
sorry.
track, obviously. Okay.
yeah, so
yes.
for the National Register, we generally refer to the property by the historic name.
I'll be
When the
darned.
nomination submitted to DC, you're using the historic name associated with, not the current name. So that probably might explain something.
And with the third one on here, 'cause I have a feeling, I've seen eyebrows shoot up before. Do you want to explain why you say it differently? Because I'm pretty sure I know.
Oh, it's a cockatoo. because that's the proper way to say it.
Yes.
It's the historic way to say it.
Like
Because
a-
nobody says it. I mean,
Yeah.
I've always said Sacagawea, and then I heard you in a bunch of the National Register meetings and stuff, and I was like, oh, that must be the real way to say it.
Yeah, and I grew up saying Sacagawea, so,
And actually, I did too.
right.
Do you have any influence on the signage? For 6 years, I've been a volunteer with the senior volunteer program. And the sign at the Miles Park Lagoon says Sacagawea Park Lagoon. And I've been all the way up to Shannon.
Yeah,
And
you
said,
have to talk,
please change
you have
it.
to talk to
local.
Christine Brown again, with us.
Talking
Yeah,
about the miles.
that's our
No, she's not talking about the plaque. She's talking about something else.
Oh, that's-
No, I am talking about the plaque.
No,
There's
the
an
one that we
extra
just
one.
recently got is for
No,
the,
It
for
would've
the
been
net, for the historic district that we got
Yeah.
last year. That's-
Yeah,
That's not what you've been asking about.
there's two different signs on the boulevard at this,
Yep.
at the swimming pool.
And that is
So
a,
there's
that's a
new
local
one
thing.
now?
That's a local thing. So let's bring that offline. What you're asking about is a
I
local
was
thing.
asking if he had any influence on it because all the way up the ladder, nobody seems to care
Yeah, not
about
a
it.
no.
local again.
Because it's
Only
labeled
those-
wrong.
Aluminum, anodized aluminum, National
Like the picture
Register
Kate showed
plaques, like the
earlier.
picture we showed, those are the ones that are.
And that
Oh,
was-
excuse me, now I know what
That's
you
okay.
mean.
Yep.
The doodads that are, okay, I got lost for a minute.
Nope, nope, that's perfectly fine. Convict Grade, just down the road, it's at the intersection when you're turning off to.
But
Big-
Highway
Right.
89,
I've driven
yeah.
it between
Yeah.
Bigton and
Yes,
there.
exactly,
Really
yeah,
crazy.
yeah. And it take the nomination when you go out and visit, and you get the feeling of the chain gangs. Working, creating the road. That went through probably 70 years ago too.
Yeah,
And then the Frederick and Josephine Butler House down toward Gardner.
yeah, it's just south of Cray.
It's
Is
a-
that the log house or the frame house?
It's the
Frame.
frame house.
Right, and it's a fantastic nomination if you want to know about
Whew.
wiping out, nearly wiping out all the species in Yellowstone prior to laws becoming laws. It was an open game territory for hunters going through there.
Yeah,
Just
really
a-
amazing
Yeah,
context.
it's
on
an
that
amazing
nomination.
context. So. Well worth reading, which you can get any of these, they're all public documentation, so.
Can you just go through your website and click on it?
You know, I
I've
don't
gotten that way.
know, yeah, the recent ones, I'm not sure about all of them. We're still
Right.
kind of upgrading,
Others are available through the National Park Service.
right, except the most recent. 'Cause they're
There's a
behind
little-
we are.
there's a
We can actually read the nomination form.
Right,
Oh,
yes,
okay.
just
Oh, yeah.
remind me, Jack, and I'll send it to you. Yeah,
Yeah,
it really is,
anything you want, just.
it's an amazing read.
Yeah.
It's an amazing
I'd
read.
like to read that.
People just stayed at this place, went out into the park and just decimated anything and everything that was
Sure.
alive.
Typical day in Louisville.
It's incredible. Okay, so this is some of the stuff when we write nominations. This is what the keeper, so the process when nominations are presented to us, we'll work with whoever's writing it or we'll help write it. When it's clean, it goes to the Montana State Historic Preservation Review Board, which is composed of 9 members appointed by the governor. And usually those members are an architect, an historic architect, architectural historian, a geologist, if you can get one, archaeologist, and then 4 members of the public with an interest in history.
Mm.
So by the time it gets to the board, we're pretty confident it's
Yeah.
good for going all the way. The board has their say, you can't get 9 people together and not have somebody say they want to do something to it, but usually it's minimal. It kind of changes at that point. We clean it up, make the final draft and send it off to Washington DC. We have our own reviewer who reviews 7 or 8 states. His name's Paul Lusignan. We love him. He's been here forever. He's probably one of the more flexible reviewers for a national register nomination.
We're just brilliant. He never sets us up. That's it. We think he's flexible, but we make the case for everything. So, well,
Yeah, he occasionally calls us up on something, but we convince him. But this is some of the stuff when it finally gets to Paul that he's gonna be looking for. Does meet one or more of the National Register criteria, which we're gonna pop into in a minute. Does it justify the significance and integrity? We're talking about integrity. It's all part of the nomination. Can the layperson read and understand the property and deserve to be listed? Generally, there is a certain amount of level of vocabulary often for architecture that you're not dumbing it down, you're actually gonna use the proper words. Because that's just what it's called, you know, depending on what you're working on. And then as it says, the nomination ultimately becomes the legally admissible record. So once it's listed, there is a box on the front of the form that if somebody doesn't want it for whatever reason, available for public, they can click that and in fact, it can be kept out of people's hands if they request it. That tends to be the case for archaeological sites.
Because you don't
As-
have the locations and.
Correct. As you can imagine, bad things can happen to archaeological sites if they're, I mean, sometimes they're no good, people already know they're there. But yeah, you're not at least putting it out there with the whole form showing. So yeah, I really partied this up. You hope you appreciate it. Okay, so again, some of this is gonna be old hat to a couple of you, but section 7 is the building descriptions. So that could be if you're looking at one building or if you're looking at a district. You are gonna describe to some degree every building in that district. You don't have to go down, for a district, you don't have to go down too far, a small paragraph, because say you have 50 buildings, you're not gonna go and provide 2 pages on a building description. But if you're individually listing a building all by itself, not related to anything else, and you're just listing that building, the bar is much higher. Then you're gonna go down the rabbit holes for building description, why it's important architecturally, you're gonna compare it to other buildings, maybe in your area, or statewide, if you know, that kind of thing. So the bar goes way up if you're looking at things individually. Sakakawea Park, that was a district. So the emphasis on each resource, and there were lots and I remember 50 resources at Sakakawea Park, some contributed to the park's overall significance, thank you. And other things didn't. When you have a district, you need more contributing resources than non-contributing resources. If you have more non-contributing, the keeper is gonna look at that and say, well, most of the integrity is gone. You have more non-contributing. So again, you want most of those resources to look kind of like they did when it was built.
Now, when you list something like Sakakawea Park, do you list that it's on Swindlehurst Island? Do you go back to the original owners?
Well, no, just whoever owns it now. In this case, it was the city.
The city, they donated it to the city of Livingston and made
Yeah,
it our
it's
city
only
park.
the record of today for ownership.
Okay, I see, which would be city.
So we document
Yeah,
the full history.
Correct,
We
correct.
go
Oh,
back
but-
as
but-
far as
Well,
that.
that's kind of what I wanted to know.
Right.
Oh,
No.
okay, I thought you meant to get
It's all
approval to
documented.
list and go all the way.
Oh,
No.
no, that's, yeah.
No, we
Thank you for
document
understanding. That's what I-
the full history of the property.
Correct.
We emphasize the period of significance. So if, for the park, for example, its significance really, for the context of the National Register nomination, began when it was established as a park, right? That's its period of significance,
Mhm.
right? Because we don't have resources in the park that reflect that earlier,
True, yeah.
Right.
right, occupation. Right, so that's focused on when we discuss it, we acknowledge the earlier history, but really we focus on the history
the
of,
CCC and WCA.
since it became a park for the city and how it developed through there, how it came to look the way it looks now.
Okay.
Right, and I don't think for Sakakawea, I don't, well, but we didn't start at like the very earliest, because as I recall, there's nothing left from the very earliest times that it showed up in the newspaper, so-and-so was hanging out. You have to have a resource present that correlates with the start of the period of significance,
Hmm.
if that makes sense. So a ranch property, it doesn't have to be a building, but say you have a root cellar, like we were talking about. The property was homesteaded in 1914, all the buildings that date to 1914 are gone, but the root cellar's there. The rest of the buildings date to 1920, 1930, so still telling part of the story, but you could take the period of significance back to when the root cellar dated.
I think you could
because
even
that's
do
the
like
first
a
resource.
grove
still there.
or like a gathering area that's just that. I don't think it has to be a structure, right? Like an actual.
It could be a site as well.
It could be a site, oh, correct, but it has to be something that reflects the
Yeah, yeah.
earliest period of use. Yeah, so criterion A, B, C, and D, those are the different areas that a property could be listed under. Criterion A is events. Criterion B, significant people. C is architecture, engineering, things along those lines. And D is usually reserved for archaeological sites, so subsurface. Things along those lines. You don't have to be eligible under A, B, C, and D. You only need one. Okay. And then we also talk about integrity somewhere in there. That's under section 7 generally. Yeah, thorough integrity discussion. And essentially, the bottom line for integrity, does the property reflect what it looked like historically? That's really the bottom line. And it sounds a little cliche, but if somebody built a building in 1880 and they went back, came back to life and walked there now and said, hey, I know that building, it probably retains enough integrity.
If they would recognize it.
Correct.
There are 7 aspects of integrity that I always have to count on my fingers to make sure I get them all. The location, setting, feeling, association, design, workmanship, materials.
That's 7, right?
No, that is 7.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, similar to significance, A, B, C, and D, it doesn't have to have sterling integrity under all these.
It has to have
It
enough,
often doesn't, and usually it doesn't.
right, it has to have enough to convey that significance.
So the definition of feeling, does that mean you look at it and you have an impression of the era in which it was built? How do you define feeling?
Yeah,
That's very
feeling of
interesting.
association, they kind
It's
of
subjective.
smell. Yeah, there's some
Right.
subject.
But your
Yeah,
background allows you to.
That's really.
Right.
Basically,
interesting.
kind of, you know it, and if you see it. It's, association is essentially, is it in the same use or a comparable use? That's kind of
Oh,
how I
okay.
always think of association. Was it a restaurant and now it's still a storefront, you know,
Okay.
or, you know, was it a general
I
store and
see.
now it's a clothing store? Or
Okay.
is it in the same general use? And that's kind of where I think of association. Is a school still a school? Well,
right.
it's being used as something else, so its integrity of association is diminished, but it's still, it's like the school is still recognizable, the school
Yeah.
still has the design materials.
I think.
So-
Yeah.
So you build the case essentially to say, this is why this property is significant, and these are the aspects of integrity that support its significance.
I think of B Street in the red light district, the whorehouses that are now residential, a lot of them
Mhm.
still have all those individual bedrooms in them. I'm not
Sure.
kidding.
No, absolutely, absolutely.
So they still have the feel.
Yeah,
Right?
Right.
Association.
There's some colorful information.
yeah. Well, you know, and in fact, listing, I mean, generally when you're listing, the keeper focuses mostly on the exterior. But that being said, if the interior is completely gutted and it's just the exterior, our reviewer has a hard time biting off of that. It's like every single interior wall's been pulled down and it's completely different.
Oh, yeah.
So
For
we've lost
for
every bit of
individual
integrity.
listing.
Correct, for an individual listing, right?
But
So-
again, the integrity threshold is lower if you're a contributor within
Okay,
historic.
yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Right, because the whole is the grouping that tells the
The group
story
telling the story
rather
versus
than the
single.
individual building.
Okay.
Yeah, so you know, bulletins 15 and 16A, those are the primers for filling out a nomination. Essentially, I don't know if people really look at that when they send us nominations for review. We just kind of do it for them.
But they should.
But they should, but 16, bulletin, no, 15. 15 is a great background bulletin. If you want to get a full feeling of significance and integrity, bulletin 15, they're online. They were written
Mhm.
a million years ago. They're a bit dry, but it's a nice picture. But it really does provide a great overview of the National Register going up one.
Right.
So. Okay, so again, these are example nominations. Pretty much everything we talked about, all of these were great nominations, the keeper liked them. And so this is again, going down the rabbit hole for the keeper.
That's the most amazing title ever.
I know, I want to be the keeper.
I
I want to be the keeper.
Almost sounds mystical, doesn't it?
I know.
Right, technically, you're the keeper for the state of Montana.
Oh, I never thought of
I know.
that.
His wife probably considers him a keeper too.
She keeps saying. So yeah, so here's what you're basically trying to look for. Evaluation of the properties during the review process. There are properties that have considerable historical significance that do not meet the National Register criteria. And again, as we talked about, that's integrity. The evaluation of the properties, there is a degree of subjectivity, and hence it's incumbent on us and whoever's rating it to prove that the properties, because we definitely get properties that are
Questionable.
they're questionable and often it's usually because of integrity, but yet the story, the criterion A is really good. So that's what you're really pushing when you're saying, okay, we acknowledge criterion C, architecture, engineering. It's not as robust as it should be, but look at criterion A. What a great story. And there's still enough criterion C that somebody that visited would be like, oh, what's different, but I'm pretty sure that's my place. But so you basically, you're putting all your eggs more in A category to convince the keeper of its eligibility.
So the example I use, is the McCormick Historic District in Missoula. And we were looking at, during the survey, and we were identifying which buildings would be contributing, which had enough integrity, which had enough to tell the story of the district and contribute to that story, that significance, and which were going to be non-contributing, that had been altered or weren't from the period of significance or just didn't fit with the story we were trying to tell in the historic district nomination. There was one building, one house, it was a residential district on a corner that had been covered in vinyl within an inch of its life. Like it was, windows had been changed out, and it had vinyl siding, and we thought, oh,
Not the big no.
no, it just doesn't, its integrity of design and materials were really questionable. But then we dig a little bit deeper and we learn that Missoula's socialist newspaper was printed in the basement of this house. And that the person that ran this kind of socialist group for Missoula for decades lived in this house. This is the only place that story, that historic story could be told, right? So in that case, its significance trumped its diminished integrity, that the story that this place was going to tell was so rare and so important to understanding the social history of Missoula that it's okay. We're gonna say, we'll deal with the lowered integrity just so we can tell this story, and then we made that case. Our African-American history,
The African-American.
we've been identifying places associated with African-American history across the state for several years. Because they are such a rare property type, because they tell such an individual story, then the threshold for integrity is a little bit lower on those individually eligible properties, because again, we're not gonna find it anywhere else. There's the Morel Bridge, what we call the bridge to nowhere. It doesn't have a road attached to it, it's sitting in the middle of Warm Springs Pond. It's
Is this
all
by
you can see, it's
Anaconda
missing
View?
its deck. Yeah, it's near Warm Springs, and it's one of 4 Rainbow Arch bridges left in the country. So again, its rarity and its significance architecturally
And engineering wise.
and engineering wise, we had to make the case. Sigmund called us and said, there's no road, there's no that. And we said, but it's so exceptionally rare, and it's the only example of this engineering in the state of Montana. Therefore, it's worthy of preservation, and we made the case. So every place, that's why it's so important to research every single building and know the story really, really well, because until you do that research, until you've learned about it, you can't determine whether or not it's eligible for listing in the National Register. You have to dive deep and embrace the whole story and identify new stories to tell.
And is that kind of what the AER forms lead to? So,
Absolutely.
and it's I don't know if you're gonna get into this in a minute, but the difference between getting a historic plaque because somebody asked for it, and having a full AER done.
It's
all.
not, well, again.
You know what I'm,
Yes, for Livingston, if the form is being written for a property already listed.
as part of the district.
Correct,
So anybody that would ask for a little plaque,
they
if
could
they're
get,
in that historic district, they could get it.
but
that
say they're
doesn't mean-
outside the district and the building
Yeah.
is not listed, but somebody writes up a very detailed
Yeah.
AER form, it's still not a National Register nomination, so they won't get a flag.
Right.
Wow.
And it's
It has
only
to
the
go through the whole
contributing
process
buildings
again.
within the
Okay.
district,
So-
non-contributing
But
buildings.
it doesn't
don't.
mean that you have all the history. It's just because if they were, did the windshield survey in 1993 or 4, when the historic district, downtown district was established. The limited information you have on most of the structures, if one of those structures or the owners of one of those structures asked for a plaque, they could
We would
get,
go to the list in the National Register nomination that lists it by address,
Yep.
whether you're contributing or non-contributing, and determine whether or not they were eligible for a plaque.
but you don't necessarily have to have the whole background for it.
Correct.
Okay.
But actually having the forms again, if somebody requests
Yeah.
that information
Yep.
for the sign,
It's
we,
there.
we don't have it. So Christine upstairs in our office, who
Yep.
writes the sign, she has to start from scratch. And so it probably puts her on a delayed schedule, because essentially she's writing the form to get the information for the plaque. But if they're already done, she just comes down. to
Oh,
our-
even in the historic district?
Mhm.
Okay.
So one fun example this year, I got the draft AER forms this week for Livingston, one from each consultant, I think. And I think it was the Fainting Goat. The history of it revealed that for 10 years it was a Chinese restaurant. And for years, we didn't know that there were any standing properties associated with Chinese history left, because there was the Chinatown, what was historically known as the Chinatown. Doesn't exist anymore, it's not standing anymore, it was over by the depot and kind of that, what's the park area now. And so, as soon as I read that, because we're working on a context for Chinese American properties in the state.
That's why you want.
I was like, what?
Yeah.
Cool, we found a place that has sufficient documentation to associate with this very important part of our
I
history.
thought Jesse had
Chinese
done that
history.
too for some of the forms.
She had done that for some of the forms, but whenever, again, extremely rare property type in the state, so this new survey that you guys are working on are revealing underrepresented stories. Stories that aren't told in the existing National Register nomination, so it's really nice to have that extra information.
I did a lot of work on the Chinese in Livingston. There's also the Warmstone basement, and you have evidence of the fires and everything else, and I have the documentation of the Chinese that lived down there. Because I did the interview of people that were involved in that.
Can I share your contact information with Delia Hagan, who's writing that all up for us?
Sure.
That would be really great, thank you.
Okay.
Excellent.
Hmm.
Sorry, I keep
No,
interrupting.
no, actually, because everything you just said rolls right into the evaluation process, based on the assessment of the property and how they have changed over time. So, because some people try to gloss over it, and it is best just to acknowledge, yeah, it's got some integrity issues.
You know, before we move on, in my lifetime, and I was born in 53, we had the New Grand Cafe, which was a Chinese family. And it was named the New Grand Cafe. It's where Food Works has their new outlet, on Main in the 100 block north. Because across the street was the Grand Hotel, which burned down the summer of, 69. And so the restaurant
it's already
across the
been
street
surveyed.
was called the New Grand Cafe.
Mhm.
But I don't know if you guys have any history on that. It was the Louis family from China.
That was done.
That was done
Is
by
that one
Jesse.
of Jesse's?
Jesse did that one.
Okay, good.
That's great,
Okay.
that's great,
Yeah.
yeah, super fun.
And you know, if you turn an Oriental around backwards, they become disoriented. She can smell them coming, I'm telling you. Moving right along.
This was west.
Oh, okay, so yeah, again, and if this is going to be part of the rabbit hole, just say, you guys probably have an idea now. Yeah, so the information provided should demonstrate the significance of the property. It's not just the history. So if you're talking about Chinese restaurants run by the Chinese, you need to compare, you just don't want to have the history of that building. You need to talk about other Chinese restaurants in Livingston. Was there more of a presence? Was there competition? You know, that kind of thing. So that's the context.
And then the
Not
Chinese
necessarily.
laundry too, which Patricia would know all about.
Correct, which we saw that in
Yeah.
one of Julia's.
Yeah.
Forms, right?
Right.
Right. Okay, and the big thing that people always forget, again, which is probably more than you want to know, but for districts, every resource, contributing, non-contributing, has to be discussed in section 7. Most people just look at the contributing. When, especially nowadays with technology and aerials, our boss, Paul, which stick them together and use the nominations. Thanks to aerials, if you send something in, he goes, well, when he sends something in, he goes in all the time. And he'll look at the aerials and he'll say, what are these 3 buildings over here? We're not discussed, but you're in a boundary.
Can't be sneaky, we can't be sneaky anymore.
So, and it's not a problem having non-contributing resources, as long as you're contributing outweigh your non-contributing, it's not a problem. Even in farms, ranches, they're big into non-contributors, because over time, they keep adding, if the farm or ranch is prosperous, they're adding buildings over time. If those buildings are added before 50 years from now, say your first building is 1880 and your last building is 1974, it's up to 74, they're still contributing to the story of that ranch. They'd still be a contributing resource. But if they say they put some silos in 1980, that's not 50 years. And it's only because of the date. They're still important to the running of the operation. But by the date of 50 years before present, they're not contributing.
Yeah.
Is it East Montana?
No, it's what we call a 50-year rule for all the National Register properties. Some local districts change, historic districts can be established by localities, local governments. And then they can set their own rules, and some are 30 years, some are 40 years. The 50-year rule is flexible in that, you can say that something's exceptionally significant. Basically, the 50-year rule is in place that enough time has passed that we're able to look back and understand what's important and what's not important across a span of history, rather than something that's just a blip on the screen. But for example, there are plenty of places listed in the National Register that are listed 50 years old. The Twin Towers, for example, in New York City, nationally significant. We didn't need 50 years to pass before we knew September 11th was going to be an important part of our history, for example, right? So there are kind of those stellar events, those and important buildings, buildings that are just so iconic that whether or not they're 50 years old.
Historic events, yeah.
Correct. And within Montana, on the Montana State Capitol campus, that nomination, Jesse wrote that, went through, and that was probably 8-9 years ago. There were at least 2, but one building for sure, the Brutalist Justice Building, was 35 years old at the time the nomination went in. But its construction tied back to the original plan that it was going to be built basically 20 years before that, but it took them 20 years down the road. So that building is actually was listed at being only 35 years old. So kind of unusual, but that's also a district. It's tied to all those other buildings on the campus district too. So it's tied to the master plan.
So there are lots of nuances to the National Register, but the basics are, is it significant? Is it associated with patterns of history or specific events? Is it associated with significant persons? And that can be a locally significant person.
Right.
Criterion C, architecture, it doesn't have to be high style architecture for it to be eligible under Criterion C. It can be for workmanship. I mean, the
Right.
Finnish log
cabin
cabins,
towers, yeah.
for example, and their specific way of notching makes it eligible under Criterion C.
Again, you have to push that argument.
You have to explain why.
You
You have to
can't
put
say
it in
because of
its
the notching.
context.
You're going,
Right, you have to explain
something in depth.
why that notching is significant, but basically, why is it significant? Does it have enough integrity to tell that significant story? And, yes, and can this document justify that to somebody reading it in Washington DC?
right.
That's far away from, has never seen this place, by virtue of reading this document, looking at the pictures, say, I get it, you're right, this is eligible for listing, it's worthy of preservation. That's what we're trying to achieve in the National Register documentation process. I'm sorry, I keep interrupting. I just love it so much.
No, it's all good, it's all good.
Yeah, so like we said, only discusses the significant buildings, you have to discuss everything. Determining period of significance under criterion B. And one thing for our reviewer, as great of a reviewer it is, he really doesn't like criterion B at all, association with the person. It's just one of his things. Just, you have to have a really good
Isn't that
story for
interesting?
criterion B for relationship to a person.
Go ahead, tell them all.
Yeah, well, yeah, so when I first started, 2008 at SHPO, we listed a section of the Mullen Road in Mineral County, west of Missoula. And John Mullen was out there directing the crews. And he sent a letter, or he phoned us, one of the two. It's like, well, I almost thought he was kidding, but he wasn't. He almost didn't buy off the criterion B. After Mullen was out there, literally out there directing the crews in the construction of the Mullen Road through western Montana. And that's when it's like, okay, unless it's like a slam dunk, let's not even go down the criterion B road with Paul.
Well, you know what, I have a question along that line. What's the significance of the Milligan Road?
I don't know the Milligan.
I don't know
Road.
either.
Out of 3 Forks.
Yeah, out of Three Forks and Butte and there's Milligan Road, a part of it's out of Great Falls. I used to live in Great Falls and I thought,
We're gonna have to ask John.
and it's all labeled and I thought, who was Milligan? But I could probably look it up, but I just thought you might know off the top of your head. The
No,
Milligan
no.
Road, not Mullen, Milligan.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Milligan Road.
I have
Interesting.
one really quick question. That is in the carcinogenic plume, you know that?
KPRT?
Yes,
Okay, yes, we do know that.
okay.
Yeah. But they're lifting it up. They're doing a tax credit project on it
Yep.
right now.
Right.
They're mitigating a lot of that,
Of the soil.
of the soil. Yep.
And where are you guys at with that?
They were looking at drawings of windows 2 days ago.
Correct.
Pete, yeah, so, there are 2 people in our office that kind of administer that program. And we just overhear everything. And when it's something like KPRK that I love so much, I listen
Oh,
harder
yeah.
to see what's going on with
Yeah,
this.
so-
But it is moving forward, at a nice clip, I think.
Yeah, and I think Lindsay's very happy working with the fellow. that-
As far as
Yeah.
like approval goes?
Right, so there's,
Approval for the
for the tax credit.
tax credits.
Correct.
So basically, there's 3 phases to that. Part 1 is establishing that it's eligible for the program. Part 2 is explain to the Park Service what we want to do, what they want to do to the building and making sure that it meets the Secretary of Interior standards. Once all of those drawings are sent in and approved by the Park Service, then the project moves forward. They're still in the approval part 2 stage. Once the project is completed, then it's the part 3 where they say, yes, we did what we said we would do. Here are the pictures to prove it. And then that's when they can claim the tax credit.
So
they
they
have-
can claim tax credits if they've already done some of the work, because I know I talked to
That
him
can be
the
a
other day.
problem, to get ahead
I
of the
think
game.
that's
They
why
get
he put
ahead of
it,
the game.
yeah. I
Right,
talked to him the
exactly.
other day and he's like, well,
Mhm.
we're gonna slow it a
Yeah.
little bit, and I think it was for that reason.
Right, we want to make sure that everything that you are working on does meet those standards because we don't want you to spend the money.
Well, and again, it's not.
And
always
think,
just
oh, I'm
us.
gonna get tax credit for this and
People
then
in the
have
Park
it
Service are
redundant.
doing it.
Yeah.
So we want to make sure that everything is concurrent and everything is approved prior to the actual work taking place.
Right.
So that's where they are right now, just working on mullion placement for the windows, I think was one of the.
Yeah, I
issues
think
they were
that's
looking
it,
at.
exactly.
Eli's working on the construction, that's why.
Yeah.
he said.
Oh, okay,
Ba-
yeah.
Base camp is, I think I actually met you, you came and looked at it,
Oh, I think it was Pete, probably our boss.
oh, okay,
Yeah, I think Pete and Lindsay went down.
Yeah,
Were they there?
correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's such a great project. We are over the moon about it. It's
Yeah.
just so
So
exciting.
sweet.
I love it.
but it has been on pause now for some time.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the, and that's the hangup, is just making sure that the people in DC that ultimately are going to certify the project are on board.
Yeah.
So that's negotiations. We want to make sure that projects, the money isn't spent, promises aren't made. And then in the end, the Park Service says, nah, I don't think so.
Mhm.
And then you're out that tax credit. So we want to make sure that everything
Right.
is, all of the ducks are in a row. It makes it a lot easier in the end.
Right.
John maybe did the accounting when we did our tax credits for the grade one
Is that with,
in 2000,
that with
around
Herb?
2000, what,
Was that with Herb Dawson?
Herb Dawson.
Oh, her.
Right,
But the accountant was John Maybe, and he did a wonderful job.
excellent.
He worked with her.
That's fantastic. Yeah, having a good accountant is key to that whole process.
Is this on the register?
No, but it should be.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I didn't.
I just like throwing it in there.
You guys need to eat there before you leave.
No,
Oh,
there's
I
probably,
I always get a
yeah.
burger and a Huckleberry milkshake.
Well, I'd like to recommend a super pizza burger.
Oh.
Super pizza burger and a peanut butter milkshake and onion rings, and you'll never go back.
Oh,
to
their
it.
onion rings are the
Onion
best
rings
in the
again.
state.
They are. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Oh, when I was a girl, hamburgers were $7 for $1 every Tuesday.
Wow.
Yeah, $7 for $1.
I think you
on
wrote about
Tuesdays.
that in the community journal.
Yeah, that was my
Yeah.
article.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And don't read the trip on that. Yeah, so the basically summing up again, things keepers gonna look at, I think we discussed it in depth at this point.
And it's interesting because there was a gas station there originally.
Oh,
Yeah.
so, yeah.
Oh, you guys knew that?
I did know that it was
Okay.
originally a gas station. I've done a little bit of research on
I
it.
was gonna
just
say,
in
you've done
hopes
your
of-
But the
homework.
significance isn't the gas station, it's the motors.
Yeah,
Or it's both.
yeah, it
Because it's
depends
no
on
reason
what
the
you.
gas station, you know, when you drive by it, but you, for those of us that are architectural historians,
Oh,
or really
the-
anybody, if you look at it, oh,
building.
that must have been there.
So it's the same building.
It is the
Okay.
same building.
Well,
So we would probably include both contexts.
it depends on what you order off the menu as to whether or not you get gas.
Mhm.
I mean,
Oh,
Sure.
I just have to pump them for all they're worth.
I know, your pizza
I won't quit.
Very good.
Actually, funny.
Yeah. So what did we, did not make sense on?
Right, so,
Everything
so
sounds
questions.
really good. You were very, very thorough. Thank
It was
you
probably,
very
sorry
much.
about the kind
Yeah.
These,
No.
these new AER forms, is that,
it's the old historic property record form, just
okay,
renamed.
so you're not using the old form like Jesse did before?
Correct. Correct. And one of the reasons that we've shifted to a new form, it's essentially the same information, it's just
Mhm.
organized differently.
Right,
Yeah.
And there's some categories and some like, certain vocabulary that people use on this new form that works with our database, so
Oh.
that when things are input in the database, everything's kind of registered the same way. We always say historic commercial building rather than, you know, historic store or something like that,
Right.
so that there's a consistency across the board, so that when we do searches, when people asked us how many commercial buildings are in Livingston that are, you know, that are documented, we're able to go to the database and search and find that. So it was really to clarify, and make it easier for us to interface, all this digitally.
There's two forms then, AER and another form that go hand in hand?
The AER form is for standing structures.
Right.
And then there's
I can't think of
I
it.
can't think what the new acronym
The old
is,
acronym, yeah.
but it's
New
for
acronym.
it's for, underground resources,
Oh, okay.
subsurface,
Oh.
yeah, archaeology.
Okay,
Yeah, what we've asked our consultants for is the AERs, because everything is above
Correct.
ground existing.
Right.
Exactly.
Thank you.
If the building's been torn down, can you still say it was here?
Oh, yeah,
It's
acknowledge that it's
pictured-
there, but it's not a contributor anymore. Yeah.
Which is kind of why
They-
we didn't
they
want to
had
spend
the,
our,
Pony Express station, and they said that's a piece of junk and tore it down.
It's,
For Calamity Jane's cabin, nobody was interested in it. At the time, they wanted to move it, because that block was our city park originally, Calamity's cabin, yeah, and they just, nobody was interested in taking it.
Well, they took it for firewood.
Oh.
Yeah.
Right.
It probably burned pretty well for you.
Very sad.
so John, you and I talked about something like the Masonic Lodge that is actually three different,
Is buildings,
Correct.
but the first two were built at the same time, but since they're encapsulated in one,
It's
I'm-
recorded as one single building.
one single building.
But the
But we have a
history
form
of
on
the
that.
individual buildings
Right,
there's a form.
should show up in the nomination. But the presentation is one single building, and that's how it's presented on the form.
so I'm thinking of.
it's
of
a
one that
single
we're-
contributing
I'm
building.
thinking of one that we're doing now, which is Dan Bailey's, and that's probably either two or three buildings.
And it's encapsulated again by.
And we've
by
assigned it
facade.
separately, the Murray, the Gills, we've assigned them separately
Okay.
as.
Yeah, and actually, that's similar to, and it seems like it's Salt, we haven't heard about it in a while, in Butte. There was a large downtown block that in the fifties, sixties, somewhere, it was all covered by one.
It's the Northwestern Energy Building.
Okay, and we're gonna peel off, this is stalled, it's been like,
Good
yeah,
now.
but they were gonna peel off all the individual outer cladding
Hmm.
and show the individual buildings.
And reveal
Which
the
then
5
they would
buildings
all
in a
get
row
their
again.
individual.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's gonna be interesting.
yeah, that's been,
I think they decided not to do tax credits on it. but-
Oh, is
but
that-
they're still gonna move forward. with the project. So yeah, the wonderful world of historic preservation. And thank you to you guys. I mean, because really, this is where the rubber meets the road. We get to spew regulations on best practices and all that sort of things, but you guys are doing the work. Property owners like the Greba Hotels, fantastic. And you guys showing up to these meetings and doing the work of historic preservation, we couldn't do it without you. This is really the most important part of Montana's preservation program, are the property owners and the people in the communities doing the job. And we have the great joy of visiting you and learning about your projects and hopefully helping lift all boats. But, you know, my job is working with you guys, is working with historic preservation officers and commission members, and it's tremendous. We get historic preservation funding every year from the federal government. And from the
For our surveys.
HPF fund, right, for your survey that we're re-granting to you guys, we're passing through. Whenever there's a federal grant accepted, historic preservation fund, we have to match that grant 60-40. So if the federal government gives us $60,000, we have to show $40,000 in match. Our
we use
state
your
historic
time.
preservation office gets, now it's about $1 million a year to support all of the programming that we do,
All your staff.
all of our
the-
staff, everything. The state of Montana contributes, actually up until this year, contributed 1.3% of the match that we had to show for our federal.
they're supposed to match 100%.
They're supposed to match 40, at least 60-40. And I've spent the last 20 years counting your volunteer hours to the penny.
Yep.
Adding those all up as in-kind volunteer services that show that match to our federal grant so that we
Yeah.
can keep this whole program.
We
growing.
overmatch, actually, we
It's-
overmatch. by
You
doing it.
overmatch.
Yep.
So
That's
if we
appreciated.
give you $6,000, you're only required by law to give me $4,000 in match, like that's the
But your
contract.
time and the time that, so that's when I go back and I look at who has attended what meetings and how long the meetings ran, and then you all are
Right.
assigned a federal rate for volunteer hours. And I think it's a specialist volunteer for this thing,
Right,
right? So,
Right,
it's more than just somebody's going to like plant trees outside, that's a different rate. So you're all assigned the same rate, and then I figure out who was at what meetings, and then every year when we apply for the pass-through funds, when I bring that before you and say, hey, we're gonna submit the application, and then we got it again, that's the documentation I have to give to them, as well as my time.
right. And that overmatch is what
It's
allows us to
significant,
get the
yeah.
federal grant that then we pass through to the communities.
So Kate, in other words, you do consider us your matchless friend?
You are matchless, you are matchless.
Made my day.
You are
You're the reason
so
we get the
important.
pass-through funds.
You're the reason that we get the federal grants, that we have a preservation program, that John
That's
and I
nice to
have
know.
jobs.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really,
That we're really
really important,
unpacking
and we
that.
appreciate it.
Yeah,
Nice
no,
to
it's,
know.
it's all documented, trust me, it's.
It is.
It's all.
It is literally to the penny.
When the state preservation board meets, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
They get their donation form and it's like, we tell them, put down the time spent reviewing the nomination, put down the time at the meeting, put down the
Wow.
time when you drive to and from the meeting.
Wow.
Because you're counting every
We're
hour
counting
that comes in, you get
everything
the match.
to get that match.
Yeah,
Fortunately, now we are the bed tax,
which we don't get.
so some of the bed tax monies were identified to help pay for the new historical society building.
statewide, that's.
statewide bed tax, the legislature maybe 2 sessions ago, 3 sessions ago, identified a portion of the bed tax that would go towards the new statewide history museum. As that is being built and less money is being spent on that building, it's shifting to supporting the historical society and our programs, including our office. So for the first time, we will have some state income that we can show as match to our federal grant, but it'll be the first time, I've been working over 24 years, it'll be the first time in 24 years that we've had any.
And you guys having the extra funds last year were what made these surveys possible, because traditionally, I think we get about 6,000 to 8,000.
Right.
All the CLG communities, certified local governments get an even split. And then the reason that we're doing these additional 18 surveys this year to start picking up on the commercial building surveys again is because you had some extra money. And you explained to me the need to survey these buildings individually so that they're ready to go if somebody wants tax credits or, so that's why we're able to move forward. We got a nice chunk of change from you
Yeah,
guys
an
to
extra
do this.
10,000.
Yeah.
Right.
In
Yeah.
addition to your 8,000.
And talking about the tax credits and such, I'm sure if you've ever been to Billings and Montana Avenue and all the work Randy Haber's done there, he's made a living off the tax credit. He's almost single-handedly brought Montana Avenue and kind of Minnesota back the last 20 years. He's been that. And he's an old pro. So even though it's difficult or more, it's slower now, like for the radio station, once you figure it out, it's not as onerous. So, and Randy, I mean, he's saved a fortune over 2 decades.
Yeah.
With the tax
Wow.
credits,
Hmm.
revitalizing that historic core of.
Probably done
building.
15 tax credits.
Oh, at least.
So yeah,
Thank you.
anything my job is to serve you. My job is to
Careful.
give you what you need
I've
to
spent so much
accomplish your
time
preservation project.
popping your ears off and asking
It's
questions already.
That's how we learn. And that's why we wanted to do this, so that everybody's on the same page, you understand kind of the basics. Because some people might know it, some people have been on Preservation Commission for a long time, some of them are new to the thing, so sometimes I like to come down and just introduce myself. So you know who I am, never be afraid to call us, never be afraid to ask John.
And
you know,
I'm
he
happy to
knows
put you
more
in
about the
touch with
National
them if you
Register.
have questions, because I probably can't answer.
Always welcome.
They're wonderful with their time.
Well, I want to thank you for taking your time to come to Livingston and tolerate our punishment. You probably don't find that everywhere.
There's no other Lindy Gibson.
There is no other. Oh, you are one of a kind. You are
That was
significant and have
very-
integrity.
Thank you. But you're in deep.
Yeah. And more hysterical than historical,
Right.
if even. But thank you so much for your time. I've learned
Thank you very
so
much.
much
I'm
tonight.
glad, and we'll have it recorded so that, again, we can utilize this and if there's any turnover or if anybody else in the community wants to see this, it'll be posted just like any one of our meetings. So I think it's just really quickly, do y'all have any board comments?
Is it public comment?
If we were gonna do, if you had, so we already did public comment, it's at the beginning, general public comment. But if you had questions for them on their presentation, that's kind of more of a back and
It's
forth.
about the sign for the grade book.
And we've already told you, and it needs to go on the next agenda because of public meeting law. So I've already got your application. It looks good and I'll bring it to the July meeting. And I don't,
It's
it's,
going up tomorrow,
yep, let's,
but that's because it's taken 89 years.
Yep.
For this to be able to go.
so just, yeah, in the future, if you have another
Nice.
sign, I just needed a week in advance to put on the agenda
Yeah.
because it has to be posted. But yeah, I've got it all and it looks good and it's
I don't think
simple.
they'll dislike it.
I would tend to agree with you. I think it's not gonna be a problem.
Patty, get a hold of John Carroll with the Livingston Enterprise and have him do a short feature story on it.
Exciting.
Will
89
will we
years
be
since
able to
my
access
grandfather
these new
lost the
forms
Great
that are being
Hotel.
generated?
And so
if
we're
you'd like
getting
to,
in
all
very
of this
well with
is,
Chelsea.
are you talking about the ones that are being completed?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely, you're
That's-
gonna
so-
see, yeah, you're gonna
that's
see
great.
them before they're,
That's-
maybe
Lovely.
before they're finalized, we kind of
Congratulations.
fast track this, but this is all now, here, and here you go, thank you. Things are not gonna be saved on a thumb
Oh.
drive anymore, they're gonna be in our server. So, that we don't have this happen again, and the state will also have them.
They're on,
Yep.
if they're on that agenda.
No,
And
no,
on
no,
that
no,
agenda.
the new
Oh,
ones, the new ones that are gonna be
Yes,
completed, and they'll be
absolutely.
with the state, but I am doing things a little differently to make sure that in-house that we have documentation, just so that we have it all available. So yeah, it's gonna be all in there, and it will be, I honestly, I think that once we've done the forms, that might not be a bad thing could we put that on our website, like have links to them? I think that would be a good thing
Sure.
to do to all of our buildings, the ones that, with the forms that we already have from Jesse, and then the new ones, just on the HBC's webpage.
Mhm.
If y'all are good with that, I think that would be interesting to have that link. People can look at it, they can read up, and especially for these buildings, if the ownership changes, they have that information, so that if they want to look into tax credits, if they want to look to do something, yeah, so if you think I like that
Absolutely,
question.
Yeah.
strongly encouraged.
Yeah, to me, the more people that have this information, then it's not gonna get lost again. That was tricky. We just internally, staff did not, we never found it. So without Jack's thumb drive and you're doing, yep, so no more thumb drives.
Fantastic. I'm so glad that we have that and I'm a firm believer in if somebody learns why a place is significant, they're more inclined to protect it. They're
Yep.
more inclined to,
I agree.
right, if they understand the context, if they, like, oh, that's just my grandfather's barn, we just did that. But then when you write it up, when you say, see, this is how it fits into this whole pattern.
Add
of-"
value.
And then there's a source of pride.
And I think it's
And-
nice to have the
and
connected buildings too.
acknowledgement.
Somebody wants to come to Livingston, it's obvious the physical intact nature of the downtown is amazing, but I think having access to that information even before they come here, even if they go on one of your walking tours or something,
Historical tourism.
having that
absolutely.
is probably really amazing to most people that would want to come here to look at all that.
Absolutely.
So
Fantastic.
if you can think of a reason why we shouldn't, but I don't think there's any archaeologically, things that we need to hide, so.
No, we would flag anything that we considered sensitive material, but no. Bozeman has all of theirs up online and kind of this.
Okay.
interactive
I'll look at their
map.
site to see, yeah,
Yeah.
like that's, that there's some more things I want to get to kind of get those down. I feel like documenting a lot of this stuff. And I talked to Preserve Montana about that kind of today, so,
Yeah.
I'm gonna be, yeah, but I've got some ideas about, maybe, and we'll run them by you guys before we kind of finalize to figure out, I think, how we spend, this year's CLG grant money. It may be possible to extend it and pool it with next year's to have one larger project. And so that's something I'm thinking about. It would be nice to continue to do the surveys, but I will say the way that you guys have sort of guided me to hire the consultants, we're gonna have 2 full blocks. All of everything from Park Street, not the depot, but the south side of Park Street from Dan Bailey's over to the other side of the Fainting Goat Building. And then both of those blocks, Second and Main, all the way down to Calendar, are gonna be finished with this. So the ones that Jesse did, plus the 18 new ones, and then we're also gonna have the Elks because they're looking at those credits. KPRK is not part of the survey. It doesn't need to be. They're already on the National Register and they're not in the Downtown Historic District. But so that's gonna be a really nice, I think,
Nice group.
a nice grouping.
That's interesting. KPRK, there was 10 sites outside of the 4 historic districts that were done in 1879. Are those 10 sites?
They're individually listed.
Yeah, they are,
Yeah.
okay.
Yes, they're
KPRK
individually
is
listed.
individually, yeah.
Right, one thing we didn't, because it just is another layer of kind of confusion. Another way to approach National Register documentation is to do what we call an MPD, multiple properties documentation form. There is a multiple properties documentation form for Livingston. when they surveyed the whole city.
Mhm.
And they identified, these are the places we recommend for districts, and these are the places that we identify as individually eligible for listing. And so that's what moved forward, and that's how you ended up with your districts and
Yeah.
your individual.
There's like the
listings.
Spring House, I think is one of them. It's outside the historic district, but it's nationally. And I'm happy to send you, there's, like you said, on the National Register, and I've gotten to it through your page. I think
Yeah.
where you can go and there's an interactive map. You can click on all the nationally registered properties and buildings in Montana.
Hmm.
And so if you zoom in on Livingston, then you can see where those are.
Right. Yeah, so speaking of the multiple property documents, they've evolved since then quite a bit.
Yes.
Now they tend to focus more on the subject. Lewistown is a good example. They have a multiple property document on stone buildings in Lewistown.
Oh, is the hotel one of them?
I haven't yet. I don't remember, but essentially, they
No,
write
the
this
Cal-
document
the
on
Calvert
stone
of the
building
yoga.
construction
The yoga.
that occurred in
No, that's
Lewistown.
correct.
And then anybody that owns a stone building that retains integrity can then list their property under this larger
Huh.
multiple property document, referring back to all the documentation in the larger form.
Hmm.
So it makes an easier way to list individuals.
Yeah.
It piggybacks under the multiple property document.
And their courthouse would probably be number one. I love their courthouse.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And their Carnegie Library is fantastic.
Isn't it?
It is. Yeah, good one. I love Lewistown. Yes.
Yeah,
Just one other thing, there's several of us in town who started looking at UNESCO World Heritage Site for Livingston. And the 20 hotels that sprung up at the same time and built at the same time Yellowstone was built, so that's a project
You
I'm
live here in
going to be
Livingston?
working
Do I?
on pretty intensely.
Wow.
But to get all those
Really
20
like where it
hotels
is
in that
down in-
history.
But that can be a multiple property document.
Mexico.
Early hotel.
Yeah,
Living
He
space.
called into
yeah, I like to
time we
get more
went down there,
information.
one of the people
Sure,
didn't know
you
what it
bet.
was, and you know, I told
Yeah,
her.
it's
what-
just
Because we
piggyback.
have the first entrance to the
Oh,
first
I
national
remember
park.
you,
in
Dad,
the
he
world.
did this, that, and the
Right.
other.
So you,
That's
another
amazing.
example, doesn't have to be buildings, Bozeman's doing. Wilson, a multiple property document on the architect.
On the-
The Wilson School?
So properties designed by Fred Wilson.
Right.
Oh, excuse me,
Yeah.
okay.
So it's gonna go down the rabbit hole under, in this case, criteria, well, actually, it's not criterion D, because architects are viewed under criterion C for architecture, engineering, et
In
cetera,
Bozeman,
in Bozeman. But in that case, it's focusing on buildings constructed by Wilson, or designed by.
my cousin Bill Grable worked under Wilson, designed the high school here.
Okay.
Wilson as in Wilson Avenue, W-I-L-L.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I just.
And the Wilson School.
There's a good article in your last magazine about him.
Mhm.
Yeah.
He's really, really influential architect
Yeah.
that spanned the whole of the 20th century, really is responsible for why Bozeman looks the way
Yeah.
it does.
Well, if there's any more further discussion or comments for John and Kate to address, I'd like to make a motion that we adjourn today's meeting.
Do you need another second? You really actually don't, if we're adjourning at the time roughly that, but if you'd like
Oh.
to,
Oh, I'm sorry.
we've just always
I
done.
have
it.
one question for you. On your original, proposal for buildings that were gonna be, surveyed, the post office was on there. And we obviously decided that we weren't gonna do that. Did you find another property?
Yeah, let's
Off
talk
the
about
top
this
of-
offline.
Yeah, off the top of my head, I think that one of the reasons is the post office is individually listed, so we already had a lot of information
Right.
about it. But I'm not sure which one we switched out for that. I would have to look at the list.
Let's pull that offline if that's okay, because that's a specific question. It's-
Okay.
Yeah. And then we can look at the map. So do you want to adjourn the meeting? Are you looking for a second?
Yes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Lovely day.
Okay.
Stop the recording.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank you
guys.
very
I
much.
know it ran.